So here with Mike Savage, Mayor of Halifax, an old friend, but also it's a follow-up, Mike, to the previous discussion that you and I had. You're in your third term as mayor of Halifax, but you're a former MP. You and I worked together in Ottawa, and we talked last time about how it was kind of nice being a mayor because a lot of the partisan stuff it doesn't affect that as deeply as it does at another level. But I did want to talk to you about mayors. In when's your next election?
The next election for the city is in October of 24.
Okay, so ours is in this October. So Ed Holder, who's mayor of London, is an old friend of both you and I. He's not running this time. So of course people are starting to get geared up and get interested in what's going to happen. But the mayor's contest this year and council's contest is a little bit different in that I think we're really up against it when it comes to social issues. We've talked about this last time. I know you say the mayors because you're chair of the big mayors group here in Canada, but that all cities are facing this as kind of a major challenge around homelessness and housing. And I was wondering, Mike, for our mayor who's going to be taking over, whoever that will be, it's a really imposing challenge. Do you, now that you've been in it for three terms, do you feel a little bit more helpless that way as a mayor, given these social challenges that are out there, the challenges of poverty, climate change, those kind of things? Or do you actually feel a bit more hopeful about it?
I think if you look at sort of the universe of those big issues, it's discouraging. But I feel more hopeful, having been in this job, as to the influence that a mayor and individual councillors can have. Um, we often hear, that mayors, as one single member of a council, can't do a lot, and it's frustrating. There's no question that as people sort of in their own minds synchronize all the issues municipally around the mayor, and a mayor gets asked to have an opinion on everything, much more than an MP or an MLA does, because there's only one mayor. And you know, I the myriad of issues that people call me about or want to talk to me about are so complex because at a city, unlike a provincial government department of health or transportation, here we have to deal with everything. And it's so I tell people that being mayor is the most frustrating, challenging, and rewarding job that I've ever done. It suits me personally.
Mm.
And to suggest that we don't have the powers to make change is an avowal of failure. We have the power to make the change that we presume upon ourselves to do. And we have to listen to people. We have to acknowledge people's points of view. We consult with our electorate much more than any other order of government does. We have mandated and unmandated ways that we deal with public opinion. But at the end of the day, we have to make our own decisions. And yeah, we don't have some of the legislative powers of a premier or a prime minister. And as you know, over the years, the power of that office, of premier or prime minister, everything is consolidated into that office.
Yeah.
But if you are the governor, the premier, or the prime minister, you quite often take advice much more from your advisors than you do from your elected caucus or even your cabinet. So much of the power is centralized. And I think that's less democratic. As a mayor, you have to go on those issues that are important to you, or any individual councillor the same way. You have to build a coalition of support. You have to make the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tougher. It's tougher, but I think it's better. And I think the transparency that's built into municipal government, and the sort of, you have to show your work in this order of government. You have to make the case. So yeah, there's challenges to it, but I think ultimately it's the more pure and effective form of government. So I feel more able to make those changes than I did when I first became mayor in 2012.
Yeah. Mike, you're chair of the Big City Mayors Group, but just yesterday, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, announced a new kind of classification for a couple of mayors. They're called super mayors. So this is for Toronto and Ottawa. And I'm not trying to so much get your opinion on that, but it seems to me that other mayors from across the province of Ontario were complaining about that. in the fact that all of a sudden, these super mayors might be able to veto certain things or fast track other things. Whereas within the mayor's movement in Canada, maybe even also within the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, I don't know. Do you see something like that is kind of a helpful thing? I know at London, for instance, we have our own challenges as every city does, and we're a city of a little over 400,000 people. But to hear that other mayors, it was probably always true anyway, that mayors of big cities like Toronto or strategic places like Ottawa were going to have a lot of clout. But do you think that that's helpful in the context in which mayors are trying to draw their municipalities together in order to face some of these challenges? Do you think it's helpful to have that kind of classification?
Well, first of all, it's very interesting that the two mayors of the cities most often cited for these powers, Toronto and Ottawa, seem to have divergent points of views on it. So, John Tory has sort of gently embraced the idea. Jim Watson has said it's not necessary.
Hmm.
I think most people who run for office would indicate for mayor that they're not generally in favor of it because it seems autocratic and it looks like you're gathering more power to yourself, and everybody wants to be careful about that.
Hmm.
So I admire and really respect John Tory and the work that he's done in Toronto, coming on the heels of Rob Ford. I think the work he's done there has been extraordinary. He's a middle of the road
Yeah.
guy, gets the business end, but has a social conscience. So I really respect his point of view. My own view is that we have the power to make change. Even in what they call the weak mayor system, it is city council who set the direction and the priorities for the city, and it is the CAO and the staff who implement them. And I don't personally believe in shortcuts. I think that you have to go and get the support of council. I know there have been times in the city of London where there have been sort of, gangs of councillors who vote the same way on every issue versus others. We haven't had a lot of that in Halifax. We've certainly had councillors who would vote for any kind of development they could, and we have others that have been opposed almost. But, it does remind me of, when I was in school, and quite often as a kid, the report card would say two things. Mike would be very smart if he applied himself more. And number two, you got to show your work. And so on all these issues, you have to show your work. You have to make, you have to make the effort. And as Bill Clinton used to say, even on issues where you fail, you have to get caught trying. I think that there's an integrity to municipal government, and sometimes you get your way, sometimes you don't. But so there's a benefit to a strong mayor system, but there's also obviously and clearly a potential weakness, which is the more power that's centered in one person, the more opportunity there is for abuse of that power. So I would generally come down on the side of saying, if you as an elected person can't get your agenda through, maybe the answer is to look at the way you're trying to do it as opposed to the powers that have been given to you. That's generally where I would fall. I would not generally be supportive of adding more powers to an individual person at the municipal council level.
Yeah.
I believe more power for municipal governments is inevitable and important. We also get elected, and we're constrained on a lot of areas: social policy, environmental policy, economic development for certain. And so I believe in the importance of mayors and city council and municipal government. I would generally come down on the side of saying it's not about more power, it's about how you use the power that's given.
Yeah. And regionally, mayors, they all cooperate, and we know that. But let's say a international tech firm that's pretty large and significant and could bring jobs and economic opportunity to a region is thinking of settling in a place like Ontario. I presume everybody's in competition to try to land that organization. I wonder if the superpower status of things like Toronto or Ottawa, which already have an advantage, they also have a budget to be able to go out there and really promote themselves and even internationally. But I wonder if that kind of thing will hurt the smaller mayors or the smaller municipalities who are already at a disadvantage. And now all of a sudden, when they're trying to bring economic opportunity, they're up against other mayors now that perhaps have more clout than they did before. Would that be true?
I don't believe that's true. I mean, I think any tech company that's looking to invest in Canada should check out Halifax first and foremost. But no, look, our economic development efforts. When I ran for mayor in 2012, I said I wanted to be the chief marketing officer of Halifax region,
Mm.
and I think to a large extent I've done that. We take the message on the road, but these kind of things and if you're pursuing a company to come to London or Halifax, you work with your provincial agencies, you look at payroll rebates, you look at incentives, but the most important thing you can do is make the case for your city as a place for your employees to live.
Yeah.
We've had an advantage in Halifax as a mid-sized city, the same as London. There's been a move to mid-sized cities where the cost of living has generally been a little bit lower. London, like Halifax, is a magnet for students, international students and domestic students. And that's a big advantage. The political capital of today when it comes to jobs is talent, even more so than payroll rebates and things like that. So I leave that stuff. I think that the strategy on that, again, comes from the elected people. But in our case, we say to the Halifax Partnership, which, by the way, is an amazing organization. Our 5-year plan is focused not just on growth, but on inclusive growth with a whole series of metrics to make sure that more people benefit from the success of companies that come here. So I don't think you need a strong mayor to go after that. I mean, the mayor she or he should not be, the person who determines, what the package is in support of a government, but they can be a very effective salesperson.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's limited or enhanced by furthering strengthening us toward the so-called strong mayor system.
Yeah. Mike, when we spoke a few weeks ago, you had mentioned something that I didn't know of before. I know that there's kind of like a mayor's parliament in Europe. I was asked to go to it once. This is back in 2014, I think. I didn't go, but I know that they're trying to assemble from around the world to be able to try to shape a lot of the things that are facing cities and also to support one another. But you had mentioned that you were part of it. Was it kind of like a mayor's group of ports? So you had mentioned places like Boston or New York and others. Are you part of that kind of coalition?
I'm part of a number of coalitions. One of the great things about being a mayor is you get to meet a lot of other mayors. There's a kinship, if you will, among mayors, regardless of strong system, weak system. I'm part of a group called the Bloomberg Harvard Kennedy Initiative, which is what they call the Mayor's School. I've done that. Nenchi's done that. Iveson has done that. Bonnie Crombie has now done that. Charlie Clark in Saskatoon has done that. A number of people have done that.
And
We're
what
each
does it
40.
do? What does it do, Mike? How does it help you?
Yeah. So I was part of the second cohort where there's 40 mayors from around the world. So the year that I did it, you go to New York, you spend Michael Bloomberg has funded this with a large $30-some million donation. He has set up part of the Bloomberg offices in New York into a school, an actual classroom type school, partnered with the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, as well as Bloomberg. And you go with 40 mayors from around the world. The year I did it, it was myself and Mayor Nenchi, Mayor Clark, and then the mayors of Seattle, Miami, Oslo, Reykjavik, Sao Paulo, and smaller places in the U.S. like Sioux Falls, Birmingham, Jackson. It's St. Paul, Minnesota. It was an extraordinary group. In a lot of cases, it was young mayors, chosen young, generally progressive mayors, who focus on things like human rights and, of course, the environment. But it's a mayor's school where we tackle issues on a case basis. You have to study in advance and you come together and talk about it. So that's one group. There's also a World Energy Cities that I've been a part of. Halifax has for 20 years, which I served as president for a number of years, which was resolved about energy. And that's now really switching from oil and gas to the transition to new energy. But there's a lot of organizations that mayors can be involved in. you got to pick your spots. There's FCM, there's Nova Scotia, or sorry, the Atlantic Mayors Congress. There's the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities. I do chair the Big City Mayors Group of Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We look forward to working with the new mayor whenever she or he is chosen. So there's we get together and talk about a lot of things because, mayors are involved in things that traditionally they may not have been. We just are. And we have to be, and we have to insert ourselves more and more into those conversations. So there's a lot of groups that we belong to.
Things like the Bloomberg group that you're talking about, is it kind of because it's at Harvard, is it kind of a an escalating thing or a graduating thing that you move through so you don't just go once,
Right.
go a number of times and develop your skills and stuff? Does it work like that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any great secret. There's not a secret handshake or anything. It's 40 mayors from around the world. We gather, the year I did it was in New York. I assume it's still that case. You spend the better part of a week in class every day. And then in the evenings, in Michael Bloomberg style, we'd go visit the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We'd talk to entrepreneurs. I remember he brought Henry Kissinger in for a dinner to talk about things. Katie Couric, people that he knew, we talk about issues. But the guts of this was we got together in a classroom setting and we were expected to talk about the cases that were presented to us and find out ways that cities most effectively can make a difference in the world. We got together for 4 or 5 days. You then spend the next year doing online tutorials with the same group and similar professors for a year. And then there's ongoing issues. So for example, they fund some of our employees in Halifax went down to Boston to study a certain aspect of planning at the School of Government, which is a phenomenal advantage to be able to provide to your employees. And I know that other cities have done the same thing. So, Bloomberg's, quite a guy. He told us one night over supper that his goal in life was to give away enough money that he would leave his undertaker $1,000 short at the very end. So I don't think that's a threat, but just a pretty cool guy. And he would come and talk to us as well. And he believes in municipal government, and he certainly believes in climate and the fact of how that's the biggest challenge to this planet.
Yeah. Does the FCM and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities have things like that? I mean, I realize it wouldn't be as grand or expansive as that, but did they have these training components for mayors that they can work their way through? I presume they do, but I'm just asking you to learn about that.
Yeah, we have opportunities at our annual general meeting to listen to experts to come in to talk about those issues. But there's also the Big City Mayors Caucus, there's the Rural Caucus, as we had when we were in Parliament together.
That's right.
Glen, you have the Northern Caucus, the Women's Caucus, which I think you attended on a regular basis. You and Irwin Kotler, as I recall, were the most regular male attendees of the Women's Caucus. And then, of course, as you know, we would have Nova Scotia Caucus, Atlantic Caucus, National Caucus. We had Social Policy Caucus that I think you probably came to. Oh, absolutely. Monday nights you'd arrive in Ottawa and you'd meet in the parliamentary restaurant and we would talk social policy, and then try to influence national discussions around those issues. And the FCM really tries to take that on. It's an expensive process bringing people together, and you could never afford to bring in the kind of expertise that you could get from the Kennedy School of Government. But there's a lot of opportunities to train and work together. And as you'll recall, FCM is a very powerful advocacy group, and meeting with MPs and meeting with the officials. Things don't get done anymore on a sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, making deals kind of thing right now. There is a place for us to, as elected people, to talk to each other and, try to influence, issues. I mean, I think you had a pretty good relationship with Bev Oda on international development issues that helped along the way, but nothing, you don't make deals now. Everything has to be justified and done in the interest of good public policy.
Yeah. The last week, Statistics Canada, Jane and I were at an event in Muskoka, Ontario a few weeks ago, and we sat with the head of Statistics Canada, and he said he was coming out with a major announcement in the next few weeks. Well, it came out last week, and what they reported at StatsCan was that the average Canadian is paying 50% more accommodation costs than they did at this time last year. So I mean that's a lot. I mean it was pretty significant. But I think as mayors or as communities, we try to tackle these problems that are there. But then that kind of thing exists, and it's kind of like a monster that's behind the wall, right? It's kind of like a perfect storm in which you want your citizens to be involved. Food banks are a good case in point. We're trying to direct ourselves towards poverty and people that are food insecure, and then all of a sudden this perfect storm comes up about inflation, the war in Ukraine, the price of gas, the price of food, all of these things that all seem to be combining in a way in which it's very hard for the citizen to remain engaged when there's so much concentrating on trying to survive. So at the food bank, for instance, we just did our own studies a few weeks ago, research, and it turned out many of the people that were coming to us for the first time and were actually working. Now, there were minimum wage jobs, some of them had two minimum wage jobs, but the price of rent or accommodation has gone up so much. They'll never buy a house and never be able to hope to at this stage. But also, the rental costs are so high that it's kind of distracted them from the other social causes. How do you handle that as a mayor? Because you're facing those same pressures, I'm sure. How do you handle that when things that large come and hit you as a community or as a series of communities across the country? How do you keep hope and keep your citizens involved when that kind of stuff is going on?
The first thing is you recognize that fact,
Yeah,
uh, and that we all have a focus on large issues: environment, human rights, immigration, social advancement. Um, we have to recognize that there are a lot of people who are not what we would have called traditionally poor,
yeah.
who are poor. We have people in encampments in the city who have jobs.
Mm,
We have people living in emergency shelter who have jobs, but they just don't make enough money to
yeah,
make a difference. So, one of the things I've been involved with since I was an MP was the push for a basic annual income, a guaranteed annual income, because it sounds simple and obvious, but a lot of people don't understand that the cause of ill health, of lack of education, poor living conditions, the cause is lack of income. And the problem is that we all have our fingers in that. The feds have policies, the provincial governments have policies, municipal governments all have policies that influence that.
yeah,
Our council recently passed a motion calling on the federal government to bring in a basic annual income. And I'm very careful about telling other orders of government how to do their business, because I don't like it much when they tell us how to do ours. So, but we have to show the way, right? So in our case, for example, we've introduced a living wage policy at the municipal level. It's not without criticism. Business organizations are saying, wait a sec, our costs are going up so much that we can't even keep pace. But I think the basic issue is that governments at all orders have spent so much money over the years just maintaining poverty as opposed to trying to eliminate it.
yeah,
Um, and I think that we need to radically look at how we approach income, people's income. And, I mean, as you well know, this is something Hugh Siegel, Art Eggleton, this is something Richard Nixon looked at back in the late 60s. It's not a liberal thing. It's not a conservative thing. It's not a radical idea. It's not a radical idea. It's not crazy. There are good economic reasons why we should have a basic annual income. So I believe at the end of the day, there's lots of things we can all do on homelessness, on social supports for people, on food policy, on social exclusion. But eventually we're going to have to look at, why do we have so many people who don't make enough money to get by? We've seen what a guaranteed income does for seniors.
yeah,
Yes, we still have poor seniors in this country, but the rate of poverty among seniors has gone down dramatically because of CPP and the guaranteed income supplement. I think that the federal government's policy on the child tax, child community, whatever, CCB,
yeah.
has reduced poverty among the most poor. Um, it's a big step, but I'd like to see governments look at that and say, we have poor people because they don't make enough money. And if you believe that that's as simple as it sounds, maybe we should try and tackle that.
Yeah. Mike, we've been through so much with COVID, and I mean, people used to talk at the beginning about building back better, or taking a look at things from a different lens, or through a series of different lenses about making our communities better. Do you think that that's something that will last, or do you think it's kind of a phase that we've gone through and it will lift after COVID itself is gone?
I don't have any great sense that the lessons of COVID will stay with us. Some of the habits will. I mean, I remember talking years ago to people who lived through the Great Depression,
Yeah,
and it affected how they looked at cash flow and things like that.
yeah,
So on an individual basis, perhaps, but I don't know. Glenn, after you and I left Parliament, I remember when Jim Flaherty died, and I was really touched by the impact it had on parliamentarians and how everybody said, the lesson here is we have to treat each other with more respect and stop villainizing each other.
yeah,
I don't think that's lasted. Um,
yeah,
so I wouldn't overstate the impacts of COVID, but I think governments have to learn the lessons, of what worked and what didn't work.
yeah,
And hopefully, I'm not talking about a grand reset or anything like that. I'm
yeah.
not talking, I'm just saying that there are clear lessons of what worked in COVID and what didn't. The problem, of course, is that there are people who don't agree with some of those things that actually worked during COVID, and that'll always be an issue.
Yeah, yeah, we're seeing that now, especially at the federal level as it moves forward. Mike, thank you for doing this. I think that's a fairly practical talk that we just had about things that communities and mayors are facing, and I appreciate that they got down to it at that level, because for people like us, I don't look so much to the feds or to the province to really engage and get involved in that. These problems are mostly local and will require local leadership to help it. And I really appreciate what you've done, and I've appreciated how you've helped me over the years. But we might circle back to you sometime in a few months from now after our election has happened. We can talk about anything that's new that's happening at the civic level across the country. I appreciate you doing this, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say one last thing before we go?
Yeah.
So I look forward to, we're going to have a number of new mayors, after this election. And our caucus of big city mayors, we're going to have a new mayor in Ottawa and Hamilton, London.
Yeah.
There's elections in BC that may impact that. We're losing a great mayor in Brian Bowman in Winnipeg. So I may try to get up and visit a few of these mayors, including in London. It's been a while since I've been up there, had a chance to see you and Jane. And
Yeah.
I imagine your kids have changed a little bit in the last, probably 8 years since I've been there. I just would say this, that in the solutions exist. And as you know, our politics has become so polarized, everybody accepts that. But what bothers me the most about it is that people tend to believe that all the passion in politics is on the far right or the far left.
Yeah.
And if you're not on the far right or the far left, then you're not passionate. And that's just not true. I call myself a passionate, progressive moderate. I just believe that the answers are there. It does require a certain civility, but it's just common sense. And I'm hoping that more and more we get a coalition of people, whatever their political beliefs, who can say, let's work together and figure some of this stuff out.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Mike. It's hopeful too. So let's talk again in a few months, and we'll see if we're
Sure
making
thing.
headways in that direction. Thanks
All
for
right,
doing
man.
this, Mike. Really
Always a
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Okay, thanks.